Rebecca Hale, 31, entered the Pima County courtroom with cold arrogance, flashing a defiant smile at the family of the woman she brutally murdered, Allison Grant. Confident that her warped sense of love justified her actions, she treated the trial like a performance where she remained in control. But what sent shivers through Tucson wasn't the crime itself, it was her serene smile, the smile of someone who believed she could never be wrong. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the evening of June 17, 2004, darkness settled over the quiet suburban streets of Tucson, Arizona, carrying the lingering heat of a scorching summer day. No breeze was strong enough to stir the air. Only the oppressive desert heat clung to everything, making the atmosphere thick, slow, and heavy. Under the faint yellow glow of streetlights, brittle desert shrubs rustled weakly, casting long shadows over fragile lawns watered each morning to survive the harsh climate. Each apartment in the small North Side neighborhood was a private fortress of warmth and routine, where people tried to maintain a sense of normalcy in this arid, lonely land. In a modest first-floor apartment on North Mountain Avenue, Allison Grant, 27, was preparing for a peaceful evening. The scent of soap and jasmine lingered in the air after her shower, mingling with the warm hum of an old radio playing soft jazz. She lived a simple, disciplined life, an amateur cyclist who spent years riding Tucson's roads to train for the upcoming Phoenix race. Independent, always smiling, and ready to help anyone in need. Allison was a beacon of resilience and positivity, a small light in the harsh desert. That night, the neighborhood wore its familiar calm. The steady hum of air conditioners, the faint chirp of insects under the moonlight, and the distant sound of traffic from Oracle Boulevard formed a quiet symphony of everyday life. But that calm was an illusion, a fragile veneer hiding a darkness about to shatter the community's sense of safety. Allison had lived in this apartment for 3 years, her life a testament to hard work and independence, often seen wheeling her bike home at sunset. That night, she was alone. Her roommate, Lydia Moore, was working a late shift at a downtown restaurant. It was just Allison, the warm glow of the kitchen light, and a glass of iced tea on the table. At 9:46 p.m., at the end of the alley behind the apartment complex, a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulled up. The engine shut off. No sound, no lights, only a motionless figure behind the windshield, watching through the narrow sliver of light from Allison's apartment. She had no idea that minutes later, her life would end in a cold, senseless moment. The attack wasn't a failed robbery or a spontaneous act. It was a pure, malicious intrusion, a brutal act without motive or explanation. An event that would leave investigators searching for a reason that didn't exist. The first official record of the tragedy came at 10:12 p.m., a brief, choked 911 call. "My friend, she's on the floor. There's blood everywhere." The operator only managed a few questions before the line went dead. A chilling silence followed, enough to dispatch 2 patrol cars immediately. Within minutes, blue and red lights swept through Tucson's still air, tearing through the hot summer night with urgent sirens, marking the start of a case no one in the city could forget. When the 2 Tucson Police Department patrol cars pulled up to the apartment complex on North Mountain Avenue, the clock read 10:21 p.m., flashing blue and red lights reflected off the white walls, shattering the desert night's stillness. A small group of curious neighbors gathered at the alley's end, their eyes filled with worry and fear. The faint smell of gunpowder lingered as the first officers stepped inside. Allison Grant's small apartment appeared under the cold beam of flashlights, tidy, orderly, with no signs of a struggle or theft. Everything seemed in place, her cycling shoes neatly by the door, her helmet hanging on the wall, the glass of iced tea still on the table, water spilled across the floor. Only one thing disrupted the order, a dark trail of blood stretching from the living room to the bathroom door. Police found Lydia Moore slumped by the door, trembling, her face streaked with tears. She could barely speak, repeating in a panicked loop, "I was only gone for a few hours. I was at work. She was fine when I left." An officer escorted her outside while the forensics team sealed the scene. In the bathroom, Allison lay on her side on the white tile, a dried streak of blood running from her temple. Her face still bore traces of shock, her eyes wide open, as if the question why was never answered. There were no signs of a struggle. Nothing was missing. A single bullet had pierced her right temple, a 9mm round embedded in the wall behind her. The preliminary coroner's report confirmed a close-range shot no more than a meter away. The killer stood close enough to see her final breath. Detective Mark Ramirez, 41, head of the Tucson Police Department's homicide unit, arrived at the scene within 20 minutes. He surveyed the apartment, his eyes quiet but sharp. No forced entry, nothing stolen. "This wasn't a robbery," he said softly, jotting in his notebook. "Single entry wound. No theft, no forced entry. Personal." Outside, Lydia was being treated by medics. When Ramirez questioned her, she recounted in a trembling voice. "I came home, the door wasn't locked. The lights were still on. I called Allison's name, no one answered. I walked in, and her voice broke, tears streaming down. "I just heard the fan, and then I saw her lying there, blood everywhere. I thought she was still breathing, but when I touched her, she was cold." Ramirez signaled for medics to take Lydia to the hospital for evaluation. In his mind, a theory was forming. This was a deliberate, calculated killing, and the perpetrator knew the victim. News of the crime spread faster than the patrol lights. By morning, the headline "Cyclist shot dead in her home" dominated the front page of the Arizona Daily Star. Images of Allison Grant, her radiant smile in cycling gear, filled morning broadcasts. A reporter, speaking gravely outside the apartment, said, "A cold-blooded murder. No signs of robbery, no explanation. This crime seems senseless, and that's exactly why it's left the city shaken." Neighbors, used to seeing Allison cycling through the streets each morning, were stunned. They described how she greeted everyone, often fixing bikes for kids in the area. "It can't be Allison," one woman said, eyes red. "She's the last person I'd think could be targeted." That evening, a small group of Allison's friends and co-workers gathered outside the apartment, bringing flowers and candles. The flickering flames reflected off the sealed-off white walls, creating a scene both warm and chilling. Few words were spoken, only a heavy silence, a silence louder than any prayer. In Tucson, violent crime was rare. The city was known for its slow pace and tight-knit community. But this murder shook that sense of safety. Families started locking doors earlier. Evening cyclists dwindled, and fear crept into conversations at coffee shops, stores, and workplaces. The press ran relentless coverage, calling it the senseless murder that shattered Tucson's calm. In his office at the Tucson Police Department on South Stone Avenue, Ramirez reviewed the crime scene photos again. Every detail pointed to the same thing. The attack was swift, precise, cold, emotionless. He set the photo down, writing the first line in the case file, "No financial motive. Possible personal connection." Outside, Tucson's sky burned red with sunset. It was the second day after Allison Grant's death, and the entire city was still trying to understand how such a peaceful life could end in a moment of senseless violence. The next morning, in a small room at the Tucson Police Department, Detective Mark Ramirez sat before a whiteboard covered with photos, maps, and notes. He was used to puzzling cases, but Allison Grant's murder was different, too clean, too precise, too cold. No signs of a struggle, no robbery motive, no known enemies. A woman like Allison had no reason to be killed, and that told Ramirez the answer lay not in the crime scene, but in her relationships. He started by reviewing Allison's phone records, texts, and emails. Among dozens of messages from friends, co-workers, and cycling club members, one name stood out: Derek Vaughn. Allison's last text, sent at 8:17 p.m. on the night of the murder, was brief. "Thanks for dinner, I'm home." Ramirez circled the man's name in his notebook, adding a question mark. By noon, the investigative team obtained footage from a convenience store 2 blocks from the victim's home. The video was grainy but clear enough to show a black Jeep Grand Cherokee passing Allison's complex at 9:40 p.m. Minutes before the shooting, the license plate was unclear, but a sticker on the windshield indicated the vehicle was registered in Pima County. Ramirez frowned. "A Jeep in Tucson summer, pretty distinctive," he muttered, ordering the forensics team to enhance the frame. He also sent officers to canvass the neighborhood. Allison's neighbor, Judy Ellison, recalled, "I saw that car a few times last week, driving slowly down the street. I thought someone was looking for an address." Another neighbor mentioned seeing the Jeep parked near Allison's lot one evening. Both sightings aligned with times Lydia was working late, meaning someone had been watching Allison for days. Back at the station, a report from Allison's friends arrived. She had a close group in the cycling club who knew her routine. One, Karen Fields, said, "That night, she had dinner with Derek Vaughn. They dated over a year ago. Derek's still her friend, but I know his current girlfriend, Rebecca Hale, didn't like it." Rebecca Hale's name was added to the file. Derek Vaughn, 35, a mechanical engineer, designed parts for a major Tucson bike shop. Rebecca, 31, was a fitness trainer at a local gym, known for her confident demeanor and strong personality. Ramirez arranged to meet Derek that afternoon. In the small interrogation room, fluorescent lights cast a pale glow on the tired face of the man. Derek sat with arms crossed, eyes down, voice soft. "I talked to Allison a few times. We were friends, and she wanted me to tune her bike for the upcoming race. That night, we just had dinner." Ramirez said nothing, sliding a photo of the Jeep Grand Cherokee across the table. "Know this car?" Derek looked up, and in a single second, it was enough. "That's Rebecca's," he said, sighing. Ramirez stayed silent, watching the man avoid his gaze. "Did you tell her about the dinner with Allison?" Derek hesitated, then nodded. "I did, because I didn't want to hide it. But she was furious, really angry. She said I humiliated her. Then she went quiet all evening. I thought she was just jealous, but I never imagined." His voice trailed off. "She once said, 'If you keep seeing her, I'll end it.' I thought it was just a threat." Ramirez pressed record. He'd heard enough to shift the investigation. A jealous woman, armed, with a car, matching the camera footage. Pieces were falling into place. He requested vehicle records, and the results came quickly. Rebecca Hale, East Grant Road address, owned a 2002 black Jeep Grand Cherokee, license plate PFM 3821. Another detail caught Ramirez's attention. Rebecca had a legal permit for a Glock 19 9mm, the exact type of weapon matching the bullet at the scene. He stood, telling his partner, "We have a suspect." That evening, Ramirez and two officers obtained a search warrant for Rebecca's residence. Her upscale second-floor apartment was clean, smelling of peppermint oil. Nothing stood out until they checked the bedroom. In a nightstand drawer, among fitness magazines and makeup receipts, was a red leather notebook. Ramirez opened it, reading the first line in bold black ink. "Love is ownership, and I don't share." The following pages were disjointed entries. Part diary, part confession. She wrote of betrayal, of the woman ruining my happiness, of needing to take back what's mine. The final page had 3 words, scrawled repeatedly. "Make it stop." Ramirez closed the notebook, his expression hardening. He signaled for forensics to seize the evidence. In the garage, they found the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Dust coated it, but the door handle bore faint fingerprints and a small dark brown stain, likely blood. An empty gun bag was found in the trunk. As they left the complex, Ramirez glanced at the city lights, flickering through the night. He knew the question was no longer who killed Allison Grant, but why. A woman, ordinary in her community, could harbor a jealousy so fierce it burned another life away over a wounded sense of love. In his end-of-day report he wrote, "Suspect identified Rebecca Hale, connection, personal, motive, jealousy, and control." Those brief lines marked the case's first turning point. And somewhere in the sleeping city, a woman might be looking in the mirror, smiling, believing she'd reclaimed what was hers in the most brutal way possible. Early on the morning of July 5, 2004, Tucson's sky was cloaked in pale gray. Dry winds swept through the apartment complex on East Grant Road, carrying desert dust and heat. At 6:12 a.m., 3 Tucson Police Department patrol cars pulled up in front of Rebecca Hale's building. The door to apartment 204 on the second floor was slightly ajar. Inside, soft music played steadily, like a morning meditation. When the officers knocked, no one answered. Ramirez signaled, and within seconds, the door was forced open. Rebecca Hale stood in the middle of the living room on a yoga mat, her hands raised high in a perfect balance pose. She didn't flinch or ask why they were there. She slowly lowered her arms, looked straight at Ramirez, and said softly, almost calmly, "You're finally here." The air in the room thickened. Rebecca wore light gray workout clothes, her hair neatly tied back, sweat still beading on her neck. Showing no surprise, she extended her arms for the officers to cuff her without resistance. Ramirez read her Miranda rights, his eyes never leaving her face. She gave a faint smile, thin and unreadable, as if she'd known the script all along. As she was led down the hallway, a local reporter snapped a photo, the blonde woman in athletic wear, smiling between 2 armed officers. That image would later become iconic for the entire case. In the interrogation room, Rebecca sat across from Ramirez. The fluorescent lights cast a pallor over her face, her pale gray eyes fixed on the two-way mirror ahead. 6 hours of questioning unfolded like a silent play. Ramirez asked, she stayed quiet. When he paused, she only smiled faintly, as if savoring his patience. "Do you know Allison Grant?" Ramirez asked first, his voice even, not heavy. Rebecca tilted her head, her lips curving. "I know she existed," she said softly, coldly, "but she didn't matter." Ramirez studied her for a few seconds, then jotted a note. He didn't respond, moving to another question. "Where were you on the evening of June 17th? Rebecca crossed her arms, her gaze drifting to the ceiling. "At home. Alone. Like most people." "No one can confirm that?" "No, I don't need anyone to validate my life." Her voice was light as a breath, but each word landed on the metal table like a clink of steel. Ramirez shifted tactics. He opened a folder, sliding a photo of the Jeep Grand Cherokee toward her. "Recognize this car?" Rebecca glanced down, her expression unchanged. "Tucson's got thousands of Jeeps like that. This one's yours," Ramirez said, nudging the vehicle registration forward. Rebecca pressed her lips together, meeting his eyes for the first time. "If you already know, why ask?" Her response silenced the room for a moment. Ramirez recognized her type, controlled, confident, convinced she was smarter than anyone else in the room. She wasn't nervous, didn't deflect, showed no remorse, just an empty gaze, as if none of this concerned her. Ramirez pulled out another photo, the crime scene. Allison lay on her side, light reflecting off the dried blood. Rebecca glanced at it, then lowered her eyes. For a fleeting moment, a subtle shift flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not emotion, but an almost imperceptible smile. "Anything you want to say?" Ramirez asked, his voice lower. Rebecca looked up slowly. "I think people should be more careful about who they trust." He stared at her for a long time, but she said nothing more. His pen paused on the notepad, where he wrote briefly, "Non-cooperative." Emotionless, no denial, no admission. Throughout the interrogation, Rebecca never lost control. When other officers took turns questioning her, she met them with a cold stare, occasionally smirking when they tried to trap her. Once, when Lieutenant Carter asked, "Do you love Derek Vaughn?" she answered, without hesitation, "Real love doesn't need anyone else to understand it, it just exists. And him, he's weak." Ramirez stopped the recorder at the end of the session. He knew that, despite no confession, Rebecca's demeanor said enough. This woman wasn't trying to prove her innocence, she simply didn't care. As she was let out, she paused at the door, turning to ask softly, "Can I call Derek? He's probably worried." "No," Ramirez replied firmly. "He doesn't want to hear from you." Rebecca gave a slight shrug, her smile unchanged. That afternoon, Prosecutor Lisa McCarthy was assigned the case. Based on the evidence from the search warrant, the notebook, fingerprints, and gun permit, McCarthy requested that Rebecca be held without bail. In the file sent to the county court, Ramirez wrote his first assessment. Subject displays no remorse, no fear, no empathy. Believes she remains in control. As the police van took Rebecca from the station to the Pima County Detention Center, she leaned her head against the window, the afternoon sun reflecting off her calm face. Outside, Tucson stretched out with its red hills, scattered billboards, and blazing sky. In that light, she closed her eyes, still wearing that faint smile. On Ramirez's desk, the first file on Rebecca Hale, homicide case number 2478, was marked in red ink. The case was officially open, but for him, an unease lingered. Sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't those who kill in anger, but those who kill and see nothing wrong with it. In early July, Tucson sweltered under searing heat. Daytime temperatures topped 100 degrees, but the air in the Pima County prosecutor's office remained cold, thick with focus. Assistant prosecutor Lisa McCarthy sat before a desk piled with files, crime scene photos, witness statements, and physical evidence sealed in plastic bags. She'd handled many violent cases, but none felt as elusive as Rebecca Hale's, a woman who didn't deny the crime, didn't admit it, just didn't care. McCarthy, 38, was known for her precision, discipline, and sharpness. She studied every line of Ramirez's reports, cross-checking each detail and timeline. She knew that to win, this case had to be airtight. Rebecca wasn't like typical defendants. She won't beg, she'll treat the whole trial like a stage. McCarthy told Ramirez in their first meeting. So we have to make sure every piece of evidence speaks. The investigative team began strengthening the case. First came the ballistics report. The forensics lab confirmed the 9mm bullet from the scene matched the barrel of a Glock 19 registered to Rebecca Hale. Her fingerprints were found on the ammo box and the gun bag in the Jeep Grand Cherokee's trunk. The bullet was fired from just over a meter away, at an angle lower than the victim's head, almost an execution stance. Ramirez reread the report, exhaling softly. Everything pointed one way, yet the cold precision of each detail unnerved him. Next was the phone data. Technicians traced the activity of Rebecca's Nokia from 8:45 p.m. to 10:10 p.m. on June 17. The device was completely offline, perfectly aligning with the time of Allison's murder. After 10:15 p.m., it powered back on, pinging a tower south of the city, about a 20-minute drive from the scene. Clear evidence she'd turned it off to avoid being tracked. Another detail caught the team's attention. Footage from a Wells Fargo ATM at the corner of Fort Lowell. At 9:32 p.m., a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulled into the ATM lane, just blocks from Allison's apartment. The image was grainy, but showed a blonde driver in a light gray athletic jacket. When technicians enhanced the frame, the light reflecting off the windshield revealed Rebecca Hale's face, staring directly at the camera. Ramirez showed the video to McCarthy. She watched in silence, then nodded. The final piece. She knew this footage would be the most compelling visual evidence, undeniable, unexplainable, but the case needed more. The team examined Rebecca's personal computer. In the drafts folder of her email, they found an unsent message, written early on June 18, hours after the murder. It read, in one line, "I cleaned the mess. No one will ever touch him again." No recipient, no subject, but the timing and wording were unmistakable. McCarthy read the line repeatedly. The phrase "cleaned the mess" chilled her, a cold description for taking a life. That afternoon, in a meeting at the police station, Ramirez briefed the prosecution team, displaying each piece of evidence on a projector: the bullet casing, the gun, the phone data, the ATM footage, the notebook, and the unsent email. McCarthy stood, her voice resolute. This isn't just a murder over jealousy. This is the act of someone who believed she had the right to decide who gets to love, who gets to live. Someone who thought love means ownership. She paused, scanning the room. We won't just prosecute Rebecca Hale for first-degree murder. We'll prove she killed not out of loss of control, but because she wanted to control everything. The team sat in silence, understanding the weight of her words. In court, the difference between impulse and intent was the line between a death sentence and life in prison. After the meeting, Ramirez and McCarthy visited the Pima County Jail, where Rebecca was held. She was brought to a meeting room, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands loosely cuffed. When McCarthy entered, Rebecca met her with that familiar smile, her eyes blank, as if studying an unfamiliar creature. "Do you know who I am?" McCarthy asked. Rebecca replied, her voice light as air. "The prosecutor, the one who'll try to convince everyone I'm a monster." "No," McCarthy said slowly. "I don't need to convince, I just need to prove." Rebecca gave a soft laugh, leaning back in her chair. "Prove? You'll prove I love too much? Or that a woman can't protect what's hers?" "No one belongs to you," McCarthy replied. "And Allison Grant wasn't a mess for you to clean up." Rebecca's smile faltered for a moment, then returned, thinner, sharper. "I see you like control too, Lisa," she said, using McCarthy's first name. "Maybe we're more alike than you think." The meeting ended in silence. As McCarthy left the jail, she stared at the gray concrete walls behind the wire fence, feeling an indescribable urge, not fear, but a need to end this. July 12, 2004, the prosecutor's office filed the formal indictment with the Pima County Court, charging Rebecca Hale with first-degree murder, use of a weapon in a felony, and intentional obstruction of an investigation. Local news outlets ran stories with her image under headlines. "Woman accused in cyclist's murder shows no remorse." That evening, when Ramirez got home, he received a call from McCarthy. Her voice was low, tired but certain. "This case isn't just about one victim. It's about the thin line between love and power," and Rebecca Hale erased it. On the other end, Ramirez replied, "I know. Now it's the court's turn to remind her the world still has laws." The next day, Rebecca Hale was transferred to a solitary cell at the Pima County Jail to await trial. As she stepped off the transport van, she turned to look at Arizona's blazing sky, squinting, then smiling. Not the smile of someone remorseful, but of someone who believed she was still running the game. On the morning of October 10, 2005, Tucson glowed under brilliant sunlight, but no one in the city was thinking about the weather. The Pima County Courthouse on West Congress was packed. Outside, dozens of reporters, news vans, and cameras jostled to capture every moment of the trial, deemed the year's most prominent. Signs, reading "Justice for Allison," stood alongside others, scrawled with the smiling killer of Tucson, the nickname the press gave Rebecca Hale, the woman accused of coldly and senselessly killing cyclist Allison Grant. Inside Courtroom 3, the air was thick. The benches were filled with reporters, residents, and the victims' loved ones. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting a cold glow that contrasted with the dark wood of the judge's bench. When the door opened, all eyes turned to the hallway where two officers led Rebecca in. She appeared in a light gray dress, her hair neatly combed, her face lightly made up. Despite cuffed wrists, her walk was poised, her head slightly raised, her eyes fixed forward, as if this weren't a murder trial, but a debut before an audience. In the front row, Derek Vaughn looked down, avoiding her gaze. He appeared gaunt, hands clasped tightly together. As she was led to the defendant's seat, Rebecca glanced around. In that moment, camera shutters clicked in unison. She smiled, a light, unpredictable smile, half challenge, half disdain. McCarthy, at the prosecution table, watched, a chill running down her spine. Judge David Klein entered, striking the gavel. The Pima County Court begins the trial of case number 2478 AZ's, State of Arizona, versus Rebecca Hale, first-degree murder. The room stood, then sat, the atmosphere heavy enough to hear the clerk's pen scratching on paper. McCarthy rose, adjusting the files before her. Her voice, low and firm, filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this isn't a murder driven by hatred or loss of control. Rebecca Hale didn't kill Allison Grant out of jealousy. She killed out of pride. She killed because she believed she owned another human being. And when that woman, Allison Grant, proved she couldn't control everything, Rebecca decided to erase her from the world." A soft murmur rippled through the gallery. McCarthy glanced at Rebecca. The defendant sat still, hands folded, her face expressionless, except for a slight curl at the corner of her mouth, as if listening to an amusing story. McCarthy continued, "The prosecution will present evidence showing the defendant stalked the victim for days, turned off her phone, carried a gun, and shot an innocent woman in the head from less than a meter away. Then she went home, sat down, opened her computer and wrote, 'I cleaned the mess. No one will ever touch him again.'" She paused, letting the words settle. "Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't the act of someone who lost control. This was the act of someone fully aware, but without a soul." At the defense table, attorney Michael Boyd lowered his head, jotting notes, then glanced at his client. Rebecca sat calmly, her eyes fixed on McCarthy with a cold, focused stare, as if analyzing an opponent in a mental game, not a prosecutor in a trial. When the prosecution finished its opening, Judge Klein nodded. "Thank you, Miss McCarthy. Defense, your turn." Boyd stood, adjusting his tie, stepping to the center of the courtroom. He began in a measured tone, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm not here to deny a tragedy occurred. Allison Grant is gone, and that's a loss beyond repair. But we cannot assume every terrible act is a calculated crime. Miss Hale was a woman driven to despair, deeply wounded psychologically, acting in a moment of lost control." He spoke slowly, each word clear, trying to plant the image of a fragile, obsessed, disordered woman in the jury's minds. "She's not a monster. She's human." Rebecca turned to look at him, a faint smile flickering then fading. She seemed to disagree with his portrayal. McCarthy didn't react, but Ramirez, seated in the row behind, shook his head slightly. He'd seen her cold composure in the interrogation room. If that was lost control, it was the most perfect loss of control he'd ever witnessed. When both sides finished their openings, Judge Klein declared, "The trial will continue tomorrow morning with the prosecution's presentation of evidence." He looked at the jury. "I ask you to reserve judgment until all evidence is heard." The gavel struck, ending the first day. The room rose, murmurs filling the air. Reporters scrambled to capture footage as police escorted Rebecca out of the courtroom. Before passing through the door, she turned, flashing a thin smile, not at McCarthy, not at Derek, but at the camera lenses themselves. A young journalist standing in the hallway later wrote, "It wasn't the smile of guilt, but the smile of someone who believed justice was just another form of performance." For those present that day, the morning opening the trial wasn't just the start of a legal process. It was the moment Tucson realized it was facing a different kind of evil. An evil that could smile. The second day of the trial began with an atmosphere taut as a wire. Outside, Tucson's temperature soared past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but in courtroom 3, no one felt the heat. Only a chilling silence hung over the room. On the jury bench, 12 people sat upright, their eyes fixed on the witness stand where Detective Mark Ramirez prepared to detail the investigation. McCarthy stepped forward first, holding a thick file, her voice steady, clear, carrying the confidence of someone in full control of the game. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, "what makes this case terrifying isn't just the act of murder, but how it was prepared. Precisely, coldly, without emotion. The defendant, Rebecca Hale, didn't act on impulse. She planned it, step by step, with absolute clarity." She turned to Ramirez. "Detective, please proceed." Ramirez stood, his dark gray suit crisp, his face calm, but his eyes stern. He placed a USB drive on the table, and the screen behind the jury lit up, displaying a map of Tucson marked with red timestamps. At 9:32 p.m. on June 17, 2004, Ramirez said, pointing to the screen's corner. A Wells Fargo ATM camera recorded a black Jeep Grand Cherokee, registered to the defendant, Rebecca Hale, pulling into the ATM lane, just 3 blocks from the victim. Allison Grant's home. The video played. The image was grainy, but as the ATM's light reflected off the windshield, Rebecca's face was unmistakable. A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. McCarthy didn't turn, only saying softly, "Pay attention." At 9:40 p.m., Ramirez continued. The Jeep was seen driving past the North Mountain Avenue neighborhood, heading toward Allison Grant's apartment. At 10:12 p.m., the first 911 call was logged. During this window, the defendant's phone was inactive. She turned it off at 8:45 p.m. and powered it back on at 10:10 p.m., perfectly aligning with the time frame of the murder. The screen shifted to a phone signal log, green dots marking the gap in activity. Ramirez nodded toward the prosecution and went on. This is the bullet found at the scene. He held up a sealed plastic bag containing the casing. Ballistics confirmed this 9mm round was fired from a Glock 19, legally registered to Rebecca Hale. Her fingerprints were found on the gun's grip and the ammo box. McCarthy stood, stepping forward, her eyes on the jury. This is no coincidence. This is physical evidence of deliberate intent. Her voice was sharp as a blade. The defendant didn't just kill Allison Grant. She calculated the timing, prepared the weapon, and chose a method to make the crime as perfect as possible. A collective rustle of pages sounded as McCarthy pulled a small red leather notebook from the file. She held it up for all to see. This is the defendant's journal, recovered from her apartment. McCarthy opened to a marked page. With permission, I'll read a brief excerpt, written about 2 weeks before the crime. She read, her voice slow but clear. If love dies, so should the one who ruined it. The room's sound seemed to vanish. No one breathed heavily. Only the clerk's pen scratching and the hum of the ceiling air conditioner remained. Rebecca sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped, a faint smile flickering at the corner of her mouth. McCarthy closed the notebook, addressing the jury. She didn't write this in anger. She wrote it with arrogance, with the belief she had the right to decide who lives, who dies. In the gallery, Allison's mother pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Derek Vaughn, seated just in front, bowed his head. His hands clenched so tightly, his knuckles whitened. Ramirez stood still, his gaze shifting from the screen to Rebecca's face. She tilted her head toward McCarthy, her eyes glinting faintly, as if enjoying a performance staged just for her. McCarthy continued. In the defendant's email, we found an unsent draft, written the morning after the murder. It reads, I cleaned the mess. No one will ever touch him again. A reporter at the back of the room dropped a pen, the faint metallic clink echoing on the floor. Judge Klein glanced around, nodding to restore order. McCarthy pressed on, her voice lower, each word deliberate. She called a woman's life a mess. These aren't the words of someone unhinged. This is the language of contempt and power. She turned to Rebecca. Do you have anything to say about this? Rebecca looked up, a faint smile forming, her voice clear in the silence. Words are what people interpret as they please. Maybe I was talking about cleaning my house. A wave of murmurs erupted, and Judge Klein struck the gavel to restore order. The defendant will not mock this court, he said. Rebecca bowed her head, still smiling. My apologies, Your Honor. I was just being honest. McCarthy stood still, her deep brown eyes seeming to pierce the emptiness behind that smile. No, she replied. You don't know what honesty is. The court recessed for 15 minutes after the prosecution's presentation. As McCarthy gathered her papers, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from outrage. Ramirez approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. She wants to make this trial her stage. Don't give her the chance. No, McCarthy said softly, her eyes following Rebecca as she was led out. I'll let her perform just so everyone can see how hollow her act is. As Rebecca left the courtroom, she glanced back through the glass, a faint smile flickering. Reporters captured the moment, her bright eyes, her emotionless face, and the photo appeared on the front page of the Arizona Daily Star the next morning. With the caption, she smiled as they read her words aloud. In the courtroom that day, a collective shiver ran through the crowd. In that smile there was no guilt, no fear, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed, even on trial, she was still controlling the story. The afternoon of the third day, the Pima County courtroom remained packed. Outside, the temperature neared 40 degrees Celsius, but the air inside stayed cold as steel. Today, Rebecca Hale's defense attorney Michael Boyd would present his case. He stepped to the podium with a thick file, his voice low, striving for the calm of a man who knew he was at a disadvantage. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Boyd began. "No one here can deny the horror of this case. A young woman lost her life, a community was wounded, and a person sits before you today, facing the gravest charges our legal system can impose. But I ask you to see Rebecca Hale not only through the lens of judgment, but through the lens of understanding." He paused, scanning the courtroom, then slowly walked toward the defendant's table. Rebecca sat upright, her eyes coldly fixed forward, not glancing at him. "Rebecca," Boyd said, "is someone who needs help, not a monster. She's a victim of a mental disorder, specifically borderline personality disorder, a condition that robs people of the ability to control their emotions and actions when hurt or afraid of abandonment." A few murmurs rose from the back rows. McCarthy said nothing, her arms crossed, her gaze sharp. Boyd continued, his voice increasingly impassioned. "She grew up in a loveless family. Her father was an alcoholic. Her mother left when she was 12. No one taught her how to love healthily. For Rebecca, love was always tied to fear. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being forgotten. When Derek Vaughn, the man she believed was everything, reconnected with Allison Grant, Rebecca could no longer distinguish emotion from reason. She didn't fully comprehend what she was doing. Rebecca tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a small smile, not from emotion, but from disdain. McCarthy caught it immediately. Rebecca's eyes glinted with irritation as Boyd continued to portray her as weak, wounded. "Rebecca isn't evil," Boyd said, stepping closer to the jury. "She's a woman tormented by her past. A woman who was never taught to manage her emotions. You see, a horrific act can stem from a moment of mental fracture. I'm not saying she's innocent, but I'm saying she doesn't deserve to die in prison. She needs therapy, not a cell." His words hung in the room like thin smoke, fleeting but leaving a strange aftertaste. The jury exchanged glances, some frowning, others silent. At the prosecution table, McCarthy stood before Boyd finished. She stepped to the podium, her voice cold and sharp as a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "the insane don't hide their crimes so well. People who lose control don't turn off their phones at the right moment, don't carry a legally registered, loaded gun, don't write in their journals. If love dies, so should the one who ruined it." Rebecca Hale knew exactly what she was doing, every second, every minute. McCarthy moved closer to the defendant's table, her eyes locked on Rebecca. She didn't act in a fit of disorder, she acted in a fit of arrogance. When Allison Grant died, Rebecca didn't panic. She drove home, showered, then sat at her computer and wrote, "I cleaned the mess." A mentally ill person doesn't call a death cleaning. A mentally ill person doesn't take pride in their crime. She turned to the jury. "I ask you to look at her now." All eyes turned to Rebecca. She sat motionless. As McCarthy continued, Rebecca tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile as thin as a blade. "That's not the face of remorse," McCarthy said. "That's the face of someone who believes she's right. She doesn't need therapy. She needs to be stopped from hurting anyone else." Judge Klein struck the gavel, signaling both sides to stop. "The court demands order. The prosecution has made its point. Does the defense have a response?" Boyd exhaled, nodding, striving to keep his voice steady. "Your Honor, the prosecution can describe my client with the harshest words, but the truth is, no one in this room has lived her life. No one understands what she's been through." Rebecca turned to him, her faint smile lingering. McCarthy saw that look, not gratitude, but the gaze of someone watching their puppet attempt a play she didn't believe in. "Thank you, Mr. Boyd," the judge said, sounding weary. "The court acknowledges the defense's argument." He turned to the jury. "The trial will continue tomorrow with witness testimony." The gavel struck, and everyone rose. As police approached to escort Rebecca out, a reporter secretly captured her turning to Boyd, whispering something, her lips forming 4 words, "Don't pity me." The photo appeared on the front page the next morning. In it, Rebecca smirked, her eyes bright, cold, fearless. Below the Arizona Daily Star's bold headline was a brief comment. If eyes could speak, hers say she never saw herself as a victim. As the jurors read the article that morning, many realized they were leaning toward one side, not out of pity, but from the chilling realization of facing an evil that could smile. The following morning, the Pima County courtroom was packed again. Outside, Tucson's sun beat down, nearly melting the asphalt. But inside, no one noticed the heat. The air was heavy, as if everyone awaited something unsettling. At the witness stand, Lydia Moore, Allison Grant's roommate, sat silently, her hands clasped tightly. She wore a white blouse, her face gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed. Before speaking, she took a deep breath, looking at McCarthy standing before her, then began. That night, Lydia's voice trembled. I was working the late shift at the restaurant, as usual. Allison texted me around 8 p.m., saying she was home after dinner with Derek. I didn't think much of it. Allison was always careful, kind, never had issues with anyone. She paused, struggling to stay composed. When I got home, just after 10, the door was open. The lights were still on. I called her name. No one answered. I walked in, and her voice broke. The courtroom was silent. Lydia gripped the edge of the witness stand, tears falling. But she pressed on, each word strained. She was lying on the floor, right by the bathroom door. Blood was everywhere. I didn't know what to do. I thought, she was still breathing. But when I touched her, she was cold. I called 911. I remember every second. At the defendant's table, Rebecca sat motionless, her eyes fixed on Lydia, but there was no sympathy. Just a cold, detached observation, like watching an old movie. As Lydia bowed her head, McCarthy thanked her softly, then turned to the jury. No signs of a struggle, no cries, no chance to defend herself. The killer shot her when she had no idea what was coming. Next up was Derek Vaughn. He walked slowly to the stand, his face haggard, hands trembling. He avoided looking at the defendant's table. Mr. Vaughn, McCarthy began. Can you clarify your relationship with the defendant, Rebecca Hale? We were together, Derek said quietly. Lived together for almost 2 years, but it got uncomfortable. She controlled everything. My friends, my job, my schedule. When I said I needed space, she got furious. Then, I reconnected with Allison. We were just friends, but I knew Rebecca didn't believe that. McCarthy nodded. Did you ever hear Rebecca threaten Allison Grant? Derek hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Once, she called me while I was fixing Allison's bike. I had her on speaker. She asked, "Is she there?" I said yes. She went quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Tell her I'll end it. She's riding down a road with no way back." I thought it was just talk, but he stopped, his voice catching. Now I know it was real. Pen scratched across the room. McCarthy let the silence linger, then asked, "Were you afraid of Rebecca?" Derek looked up. Yes, I was afraid of her eyes. She could stay silent for hours, just staring, like she was calculating everything in her head. A soft laugh broke the silence. Faint, but enough to turn heads. All eyes shifted to Rebecca. She leaned back in her chair, a smirk on her lips. The laugh wasn't loud, not mocking, just a fleeting, sharp sound, like a blade's edge. Judge Klein slammed the gavel. Order, Defendant Hale, if you disrupt this court again, I'll have you removed. Rebecca stopped, turning to the judge, her voice calm. My apologies, Your Honor. I just found his words a bit dramatic. McCarthy stared at her, saying nothing. In that moment, the courtroom felt drained of air. The jury, reporters, spectators, all watched the woman who laughed during testimony about her victim. Continue, Mr. Vaughn, the judge said, his voice cold. Derek took a deep breath, avoiding Rebecca's gaze. I've never seen eyes like hers, he said. Like she wasn't looking at you, but through you, like I was just an obstacle between her and what she wanted. As he left the stand, McCarthy thanked him. Derek passed Rebecca without looking, but she watched him, her eyes still cold, her smile still there, thin as a cut. The final witness of the day was the coroner, Dr. Linda Chen, who performed Allison's autopsy. She stood straight, her voice clear, emotionless. The shot was fired from no more than 3 feet away, at a downward angle. The fatal wound pierced the right temporal lobe, causing instantaneous death. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds on the victim's hands. She didn't know what was happening. McCarthy asked, "What can you conclude from this evidence, Doctor?" Dr. Chen replied firmly. This was a deliberate, intentional act, not a reflex, not self-defense. It was a precise shot, almost an execution. The courtroom was silent. McCarthy glanced at Rebecca, waiting for a reaction. She just sat there, Chen resting on her hand, seemingly bored. As Dr. Chen left the stand, McCarthy concluded, "No one in this room doubts Allison Grant died suddenly. But we must remember what makes this case terrifying isn't just the act of murder, it's the killer's attitude toward that death." Rebecca laughed softly again, so quiet only those nearby heard. But this time, the sound seemed to echo in the space. Judge Klein gripped the arms of his chair. "Enough," he said, his voice heavy as the gavel. "Defendant Hale, you are removed from the courtroom once more. Officers, escort her out until the trial resumes." 2 officers approached, but Rebecca didn't resist. She stood, adjusted her cuffs, turned to McCarthy, tilted her head, and smiled. Thin, faint, arrogant. The door closed behind her, leaving absolute silence for a few seconds. A reporter captured the moment, the photo showing her from behind, cuffed hands, a long shadow on the courtroom floor, lips slightly curved. The next day, it ran across newspapers with the headline, "The Smile That Silenced the Court." From that day in Tucson, people didn't just remember the Rebecca Hale case as a brutal crime, but as proof that sometimes evil doesn't need to shout to inspire fear. It only needs to smile. The 4th morning of the trial, the courtroom's atmosphere was so thick it was nearly suffocating. The gallery had no empty seats. Everyone knew today the prosecution would play a recording between Rebecca Hale and an old friend, evidence considered the case's most damning. Reporters crowded, cameras ready to catch any reaction from the defendant. At the prosecution table, ADA Lisa McCarthy arranged her documents, her gaze resolute. She'd prepared for this moment for months, yet couldn't shake the unease about what everyone was about to hear. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests to present audio evidence extracted from a recording dated May 20, 2004, between the defendant, Rebecca Hale, and witness Marianne Lopez," McCarthy said. Her voice steady, sharp and firm. Judge Klein nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom lights dimmed. The sound system crackled softly. Then a woman's voice emerged. Rebecca's, clear, low, unhurried. "She thinks she can just smile and take everything from me? Pathetic. She doesn't deserve to live." The brief audio stopped, and no one in the room breathed. McCarthy scanned the jury, their eyes wide silent. Derek Vaughn sat in the front row, his body rigid, hands clenched until his knuckles whitened. Rebecca sat motionless, then suddenly laughed. The laugh started softly, then grew, echoing eerily in the silent courtroom. Not a laugh of shame or panic, but a confident, relaxed sound, like hearing a favorite song replayed. McCarthy stood tall, staring directly at her. "You killed someone," she said, each word deliberate, "and you're proud of it?" Rebecca raised her head, her eyes gleaming under the lights. Her smile faded, replaced by a chilling calm. Her voice was soft but clear, resonating through the room. "I just fixed nature's mistake." A shiver ran through the courtroom. Murmurs ceased. In that moment, Tucson seemed to freeze, only absolute silence remained. McCarthy didn't move. Judge Klein leaned back in his chair, his eyes darkening. Ramirez, seated behind the prosecution, felt a chill down his spine. Derek Vaughn couldn't take it anymore. He shot to his feet, his voice choked with rage. "You're sick. You don't get to decide who lives or dies." Rebecca turned to him, tilting her head, her smile returning. "I didn't decide for anyone, Derek," she said softly. "I just took back what's mine." Murmurs erupted, and McCarthy slammed her hand on the table. "Your Honor," Klein struck the gavel repeatedly. "Order, officers, ensure silence." Rebecca sat there, unruffled, lips curved. The jury stared, some turning away, unable to bear her empty gaze. A female juror bowed her head, covering her mouth, tears spilling, not from pity, but fear. McCarthy took a deep breath, striving to keep her voice steady. "Your Honor," she said, "this is no longer a question. The defendant has just revealed the nature of her actions. This was a planned, justified, and worst of all, rationalized crime." Rebecca turned to her, her voice light. "No need to rationalize. Everyone lives for what they believe in. I'm just more honest than most." McCarthy clenched her fists. "What do you believe in, Rebecca? That you have the right to kill someone because they loved the same person you did?" "No," Rebecca replied, her voice almost gentle. "I believe some people were born in the wrong place." The courtroom fell silent again. Judge Klein struck the gavel, but the sound couldn't mask the creeping dread. Ramirez glanced at McCarthy, shaking his head slightly. He knew she was fighting to stay composed, but in her eyes, he saw a mix of outrage and pity. "The court will recess for 15 minutes, Klein said hoarsely. "Jury, please, exit to confer briefly." Everyone stood. The air was chaotic. Derek remained standing, face flushed, eyes fixed on Rebecca. "You destroyed everything," he said through gritted teeth. Rebecca tilted her head, her smile unchanged. "No, Derek," she said softly. "I just cleaned up." 2 officers escorted her out. As she passed the gallery, McCarthy watched, her heart heavy with a choking sensation. She no longer saw an ordinary woman, just a human-shaped void, a soul that had erased the line between right and wrong. In the hallway, reporters swarmed as the courtroom door opened. One shouted, "Rebecca, do you regret anything?" She paused for half a second, turned, her smile sharp as a blade. "Regret? Loving? No." That evening, local news replayed the audio, and Rebecca's laugh in court. The anchor spoke slowly. "No case has shaken Tucson like this." A smile, a sentence, and the entire city realized they were witnessing something beyond guilt. They were seeing evil in human form. The next morning, the jury returned to the courtroom. Their faces were heavy. An older man, the third juror, whispered to another, "I don't think we need more evidence. I've seen enough." The other only nodded, eyes fixed on the empty defendant's table. Rebecca was brought in minutes later, her walk unchanged. She sat, quietly asking an escorting officer, "What are people saying about me out there?" "That you're crazy," he replied coldly. Rebecca laughed softly. "Crazy? No. I'm just more honest than they are." That remark echoed through the courthouse hallway, then flooded the afternoon papers like a chilling quote. In McCarthy's report to Judge Klein after the session, she wrote briefly, "The crime is no longer in question. It's a truth," she confirmed herself, not with a confession, but with arrogance. That day, as the trial paused, McCarthy left the courthouse, standing under Arizona's blistering sun. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, trying to shake the image of the woman smiling amid accusations. But she couldn't. Sometimes, what haunts most isn't the sound of a gunshot, but a smile echoing in memory, the smile of someone who believes justice is just a game. On the final morning of the trial, Tucson blazed under scorching sunlight. In that harsh light, the Pima County courthouse held a different atmosphere. Cold, heavy, expectant. Today was the close of arguments. The jury had heard enough evidence, testimonies, the recording, and the defendant's laugh. All that remained was the final word from the woman the press called the smiling killer of Tucson. Judge David Klein tapped the gavel lightly, his voice slow and hoarse. "Miss Hale, The court allows you to speak a final word before we retire for deliberation. Do you have anything to say? Rebecca, in a gray prison dress, rose from the defendant's chair. Beside her, attorney Michael Boyd reached to touch her arm as a reminder, but she stepped back slightly. "No need, Mr. Boyd," she said softly, a faint smile on her lips. "I think I can speak for myself." The judge nodded, motioning her forward. Rebecca stepped to the center of the courtroom, her cuffs removed, head held high, facing the jury. Not one of them moved. Only the hum of the air conditioner and the light casting a white glow on her calm, unrepentant face filled the space. "I know," Rebecca began, her voice low, each word clear. "Everyone wants to hear me say I'm sorry." She paused, her eyes sweeping the jury. "But I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I need to." A few in the gallery gasped softly, but she ignored them. "I just want you to remember how much I loved," she continued, her voice slow, brimming with cold confidence. "I loved him with everything. So much that I couldn't stand seeing someone else step into his life. Some call it selfish, possessive. I call it loyalty. I dared to do what the weak only dream of." A pen dropped from a reporter's hand, clinking faintly. Rebecca turned toward them, tilting her head, a smile flickering. "You'll all write about me, won't you? You'll make me a monster. But I know, deep down everyone's curious about that feeling. The feeling of being loved so much someone would die for you." Murmurs swept the courtroom. Derek Vaughn in the front row bowed his head, shoulders trembling. Allison Grant's mother covered her mouth, tears falling uncontrollably. Rebecca glanced at them, devoid of compassion. "I don't regret it," she said, her voice softening, almost sweet. "Because, in that moment, I felt peace. I restored order. Everything fell back into place." McCarthy shot to her feet, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Enough." Rebecca turned, her eyes gleaming, as if waiting for this. "Something to say, Miss McCarthy." McCarthy stepped forward, facing her directly. "I want to say you've never loved anyone but yourself," she said coldly. "You didn't protect love, you protected your ego. You killed because you feared losing the illusion of your worth. And that's what makes you emptier than anyone." Rebecca didn't answer immediately. She studied McCarthy for a long moment, then laughed softly. "Actually," she said, "you and I aren't so different. You live to prove you're stronger than others. We just chose different ways to do it." McCarthy didn't reply. The silence between the two women stretched like a taut string about to snap. One stood for justice, the other for its distortion. The jury sat silently, their faces weary but tense. No one could look away from the scene, a killer turning her final defense into a speech about love and power. Judge Klein struck the gavel hard. "Miss Hale, this is not a stage. Respect the court." Rebecca turned to him, her voice low but firm. "I respect the court, sir. I just don't respect hypocrisy." Return the defendant to her seat. Officers approached, but Rebecca stood still. She scanned the room one last time, her lips curving into an enigmatic smile. "No one will forget me," she said softly. Almost a whisper, but loud enough for all to hear, "because no one dares to be as honest as I am." As she sat, McCarthy slowly returned to the prosecution table. She opened her file but didn't look at it. Her eyes lingered on the chair where Allison once sat during cycling team meetings, her warm smile and kind eyes vivid in memory, and now, just meters away, was a different smile. The smile of someone who erased it all. Judge Klein turned to the jury. "You've heard everything. Now it's time to do your duty." He nodded to the officers. "Remove the defendant so the jury can deliberate." Rebecca stood, walking between two officers. As she passed McCarthy, she paused for half a second, tilting her head. "You know," she whispered, "justice has no face. But I do, and they'll remember it forever." McCarthy didn't respond, only stared back. A heavy silence enveloped them both. The jury bowed their heads, avoiding Rebecca's gaze. No one spoke. As the courtroom door closed, a young reporter in the back row scribbled, "None of us knew what to fear her for, the crime she committed, or the way she made evil sound rational." In that moment, the courtroom's anger turned to fear. They no longer saw a killer. They saw evil that spoke, smiled, and believed it had won in the final moment of silence. On the afternoon of October 12, 2005, after 4 tense hours of deliberation, the Pima County Courthouse jury returned. Late-day sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting cold streaks across the wooden floor. Everyone stood as the rear door opened. Fatigue marked their faces, but their eyes held resolve. They'd heard enough. The laugh, the arrogant confession, the undeniable evidence. Now, they had one final task: to deliver the verdict Tucson awaited. Rebecca Hale was brought back amid the click of cameras. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair neatly tied, her wrists loosely cuffed. Her steps were slow, unafraid. As she sat at the defendant's table, she looked up at the jury, smiling, the same thin blade-like smile glinting in the afternoon light. Judge David Klein entered, his face somber. He sat, tapping the gavel 3 times. "The court has received the jury's conclusion," he said, his voice hoarse and heavy, "and will announce it now." The room fell silent. No chairs creaked, no pens scratched, only the heavy breathing of over 100 people waiting. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with silver hair, stood, holding a sealed paper. His voice trembled slightly, but was clear. "In the case of the state of Arizona versus Rebecca Hale, we, the jury, after considering all evidence and testimony, find the defendant, Rebecca Hale, guilty of first-degree murder." A sharp exhale echoed somewhere in the room, then silence. Rebecca remained still. She didn't flinch, didn't bow her head. Only a small movement. Her lips curved slowly into a smile, almost relieved. Judge Klein nodded, his voice steady but laced with bitterness. "Thank you, jury. You fulfilled your duty." He set the paper down, looking directly at Rebecca. "Miss Hale, please stand." Rebecca rose, her posture straight, her pale gray eyes locked on the judge. No hesitation, no trace of remorse. Klein studied her for a long moment, then spoke slowly, each word heavy. "You didn't just kill a woman, you killed this community's trust, in safety, in kindness, in the idea that love is something good. Your actions didn't stem from anger or fear. They came from arrogance, from the belief you had the right to decide another's life." Rebecca tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. Klein continued, "This court sees no sign of remorse in you, no regret, only cold satisfaction. Therefore, the sentence will reflect not only the crime you committed, but the emptiness of your conscience." He paused, looking at the document on his desk. "For the charge of first-degree murder, use of a weapon with intent, and willful infliction of harm, this court sentences Rebecca Hale to 90 years in Arizona State Prison, Florence Unit, with no possibility of parole." The courtroom was silent, as if time stopped. The sunlight illuminated Rebecca's face, making it glow. She didn't move, only blinked softly, then gave a faint smile. Not mocking, not defiant, but almost serene. In the front row, Allison's mother sobbed into her hands. Derek Vaughn bowed his head, shoulders shaking. McCarthy stood motionless, her hands clenched, her eyes a mix of triumph and exhaustion. She knew the sentence was necessary, but it brought no relief. Cameras clicked furiously as Rebecca turned, scanning the room. A reporter in the front row captured the moment, her face radiant in the light, eyes deep, and that faint smile, as if she alone understood what had happened. She spoke softly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "At least I'll be remembered." McCarthy heard every word. She closed her eyes, exhaling. Part of her wanted to shout, to say no one would remember Rebecca as she thought, that they'd only remember Allison. But she knew words were futile. Rebecca had won her own psychological game, at least in her mind. Judge Klein struck the gavel, one last time. The wood's thud echoed like a crack in the air. "This trial is concluded," he said quietly. "Remove the defendant." 2 officers approached. Rebecca turned back to the gallery one last time, her eyes sweeping over each face, as if memorizing them. As she stepped out, the hallway light caught her blonde hair, making her look like she was walking into a hazy glow. An image many in the courtroom later recalled as a scene from a nightmare. Outside, Tucson remained calm as ever. But for those who witnessed it, that peace was gone forever. Reporters swarmed McCarthy as she left the courthouse, all asking her thoughts. She said only one thing: justice doesn't need a smile. That evening, the news replayed the trial's end. Images of Rebecca standing for the verdict, her thin smile, and her final words aired repeatedly. The anchor closed in a somber tone. A court can sentence a person, but how do you sentence a smile? And indeed, in the days that followed, Tucson couldn't stop talking about that smile. It appeared in newspapers, on TV, even in coffee shop conversations where people shuddered yet felt curious. Rebecca Hale's smile transcended her crime, becoming a haunting symbol of the coldness lurking in human nature. At Florence Prison, as the iron door closed behind her, Rebecca glanced through the small slot. No one looked back. Only the sound of the lock and metal clanging echoed. She smiled again, whispering to herself, "They'll never forget." Outside, Arizona's desert sun set in a blaze of red. In the evening stillness, people said Tucson had finally reclaimed its peace. But for those in the courtroom that day, they knew that peace was just a thin veneer over a lingering obsession, the smile of a woman who believed she'd be remembered forever. The story of Rebecca Hale, the smiling killer of Tucson, is not just a criminal tragedy, but a profound warning about how emotions, pride, and an obsession with control can turn a person into a destroyer. In today's United States, where personal relationships, social media, and the pressure to succeed often trap people in cycles of comparison and jealousy, this case remains chillingly relevant. Rebecca didn't kill in madness, but in cold clarity. She believed love gave her the right to possess another. Her courtroom statement, "I just fixed nature's mistake," reveals the distortion of emotions when love becomes a tool to affirm the self. Here, the crime stemmed from a lack of self-understanding and emotional boundaries, issues still prevalent in modern American society, where relationship violence and controlling behaviors quietly spread. From this story, we learn that love is never ownership. When people try to make others objects to fill their own voids, tragedy is inevitable. In America, where individuality and freedom are celebrated, learning to manage emotions, seek therapy, and cultivate empathy is more crucial than ever. Rebecca's story reminds us that coldness isn't strength, and a smile isn't always harmless. Sometimes, it's a mask for the emptiness within. In a hyper-connected yet isolated society, the most important thing isn't to be remembered, but to live as a person who loves without harming others. If this story makes you reflect on the line between love and obsession, hit the subscribe button to join us in exploring more cases that touch the core of human nature. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, where every smile hides a secret.